Uh, Abachukule yun yanita illa fogok himayon machimpahilga. Akuyupahos is no one to kohinata stastia kami fogon is nun machimpahil. Yung stamakil go halog is nun bigkon chichugulistok is nung mat quite chachit mat kumawis stastiahe machimasilal. Is no one to mat kumawisit uya stastia kami kon akuyupahos. Yun yanita mo mat kong hiskafon at sa yupahos kami ko tin alila mo kahal. Magkog yun uya yun ato yak isa fugon hulput kopaila fugon is nun matima sila til is nuk uya sen mat ko hitit mata timawitit nuk sukupa uya sen hitis tachiahe is nun matima sila til ka fugog kami fugog yun stisa mo yun uya sen titilapulahe uya sen bikon is nun matima sila til is nun bikon tay chachis tachiahe ate mawitit kami fugog is nukun sila ho uya sen mat ko witis kagon stamahil ka kamis kan at sa yupang ho yun yanita kami fugog is nukun sila ho kamis kan yun hinifod lamali famo uya sen matay chachit tuyo kat imi sa fa uslachi welin uya sen matay chachis tuchahe machimasilal kamis kan akayupang hos kamo sen yun yanita machimasilala in Jesus name amen. I would kind of like to translate a little bit of what I said. I thank the Lord for this day. I asked Him to we put in Him first to lead us throughout the day and to watch everyone. And then all that sickness that's out in the world that's come upon us, whatever sickness that we have, I asked Him that He would be with each family and help them and watch over them. He is always there, so I thanked Him for that. Asked Him to help with this conference, and then whoever's on the road going to the conference, or if they're there, I asked Him to watch over them, and then that we really appreciate Him, and then that's kind of what I asked.
Thank you, Elder Williams.
Thank you for letting me do this prayer.
Yes, and we hope to have you again next year, of course.
All right, thank you.
Right, bye.
Bye.
We'll now have our welcoming remarks by Professor Goodley, the director of the Lewis Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice at Southern University Law Center.
Thanks so much, Angele. Can you hear me clearly? Great. So Southern University Law Center has a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and affirm Indigenous culture, history, and experiences. SULC is a higher learning community and a part of the Baton Rouge landmass, which was built upon the traditional and the ancestral lands of Indigenous people. Featured at the Bluffs, known historically as Scotts Bluff, on the Baton Rouge landmass, is a commemorative sculpture that recognizes how Baton Rouge got the name of Red Stick, which was the location of the boundary for the hunting grounds of the Homa tribe, the Bayugula Indian tribe as well. SULC also recognizes other Native communities native to this region, including the Caddo Adai Indians of Louisiana, Biloxi Chitimacha Confederation, the Chitimacha tribe of Louisiana, the Choctaw Nation, Coushatta tribe, Four Winds Cherokee tribe, Muskogee, Pointe-Ancien tribe, Tunica Biloxi tribe, United Homa Nation, and Attakapaw, because that was left off of our land acknowledgement. We're going to add them in there too. And others whose memories have been erased by violence, displacement, migration, and settlement. As a university, we thank them for their strength and resilience as a steward of this land and are committed to creating and maintaining a living and learning environment that embraces individual difference and the Indigenous peoples of our region. I had to open with the land acknowledgement, and I hope that we can continue recognizing our natives whose land we occupy today. I'd like to open now with a passage from my good friend, Dr. Joy, in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, where she says, in the future, If we are to move ahead and thrive, we need to truly understand and accept who we are as a people. It is through knowing who we are and what we are that we can identify our strengths and build upon them. Then, using our strengths, we need to heal from the injuries of our history. We need to heal ourselves. We need to heal our families. We need to heal our communities. Once we know ourselves and are solidly on the path to health, we can move at the pace necessary to more than catch up. We can excel. So good morning, and thank you all for joining us for our second annual Restorative Justice Conference. My name is Ada Goodley, and I'm the director of the Lewis A. Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice here at the Southern University Law Center. And on behalf of my colleagues and friends at the Southern University Law Center, we welcome you to this unique experience that we hope will leave you with a better understanding, a better appreciation and vision for how restorative justice can be used to reckon with the year that we have just had and the intergenerational trauma that has plagued our communities for generations. We are thrilled to partner once again with the Restorative Center under the fearless leadership of Dr. Shaylee Agnihotri. We're also excited to provide unique opportunities for experiential learning and transformational justice. What a year we had at the beginning with an act that almost was unimaginable for our time and in our land. We have been sent messages from that time that confuse and confound us, confuse and confound the human spirit. Messages such as the one that Kyle Rittenhouse's jury sent our country. Messages like the lack of justice for Breonna Taylor and so many others who were taken too soon and unjustly. The Southern University Law Center interacts and has interacted with restorative justice for a number of years. And the way that that interaction has evolved has really, truly been a beautiful thing. We started with a partnership with Northeastern University School of Law, Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. And our students have been contributing to the efforts that began under the Emmett Till Bill Act and under the Emmett Till Bill II Act to uncover racially motivated homicides and tell the truth of the violence of the Jim Crow South. Our students have continued to research these cases and in partnership with CRRJ, and now for the last 3 years have been exposed to the circle process, thank you TRC, and how it can be used in our criminal justice system and other systems of inequity. The body of work in our partnership is vast, it's mass, and we have wonderful teammates that have created a training for police officers that centers these cases of racially motivated homicides, this historical violence, this intergenerational trauma. History cannot be summed up with historical markers only. And so our acts of restorative justice in these cases, that's not the end of it. Historical markers are not where the work ends. It must continue in our homes, in our jobs, in our policymaking, in our hospitals, schools, churches, and most importantly, in our communities. So I hope that you will take away from this conference an understanding of how you may apply restorative justice in your life and realize the power of reckoning with the truth and providing the space and opportunity for a conversation to begin in life so that healing can follow. So join us this morning. We have a prolific activist who has been on the front lines with protesters and communities on the streets and the jails and at the tables. But before we hear from him, we'd like to welcome our chancellor and fearless leader, Chancellor John K. Pierre, to give a couple of words of welcome.
I think we might have to come back to Chancellor Pierre. I don't see him yet online.
Okay, not a problem. The Chancellor is attending another conference. We have a couple of conferences happening at the Law Center, but he will join us shortly as soon as he's available. So let's go ahead on and get to it. Our guest who is going to help us kick off this conference and set the tone for where we are going and where we're trying to go, Mr. DeRay McKesson.
It is good to be here. I'm excited to be here. And, I haven't Haven't been back to Baton Rouge since I was arrested, so it's this is like a homecoming in some ways.
Yes, and this is a happy homecoming because we love you and we are appreciative of your time, and we thank you for being here to share some of your experiences with us.
So I'm happy to talk.
Fantastic. So just so that our audience can understand the breadth of your experience with injustice and dealing with people and communities reeling from injustice, could you tell us how you came to find your voice in your life? And it's really been a life of service.
Yeah, so I started out as a youth organizer in Baltimore. Like that was my heart. I was organizing when I was a kid, mostly bringing adults and young people together to solve problems. That was what I did from like 13 to I got to college. And I also was in student government. Student government was another big part of my life where I learned a lot of skills. But it was teaching that really changed everything for me. I taught sixth grade math in East New York, Brooklyn. Those young people, I'm still close to some of them. They're like 25 now. I taught 14 years ago, which feels wild. And then I opened up an after school center in Baltimore after that. But those two experiences were the first time in my life where I understood the urgency of the work we do, not as like a theoretical thing, not as a thing to study, but it was like, wow, like I am math to you. Like if I don't do my job well, like you are screwed and that's not your fault. And that was really big for me. And then I worked in school systems, trained teachers, stuff like that. And when Mike Brown was killed on August 9th, 2014, I was in Minneapolis. I used to lead all staffing for the district. So I hired everybody. I hired superintendents, bus drivers, principals, teachers. I managed that process for the district. And by the time August comes, we're sort of done, right? It's like we should have hired everybody by the time school starts. So we were winding down. I saw this happen on CNN and Twitter. And I'll never forget, CNN made it seem like the protesters were like wild people. And this was early, it was like 5 days in. And on Twitter, it was like an all call. It was like literally, if you can come, we need help. The police are killing people, the police are hurting people. And I was like, I'm not doing anything for the weekend. So the least I can do, like literally the least I can do is stand in the middle of the street. That like, if my commitment to kids is not strong enough for me to give up a weekend, then like, this isn't really a living commitment. So I went and the rest is history. I went for 2 days, and the second night I was in St. Louis was the first night that I was tear gassed, and I didn't go back to work. I was like, I'll get another job, but there's not every day that you do what you know is right. And that was one of the things I was like, I know this is right. I don't have no answers. I don't know how this is going to end. I like defaulted on my student loans. I had no money, but like it was right.
Yeah. I completely understand that. You don't choose your calling.
The call and calls.
The call and calls, yeah.
But you choose is to answer it or not, right? And it was like, you know, I had to surrender the need to like have every answer, and because like there were nights when, you know, I slept in. I've seen the critiques of me. People are like he did it. And I'm like, I slept in basements. I slept in the car. There was a woman in St. Louis who like opened her house up to the protest. Shout out to her. She's so great. And it was like a lot of us lived in this house. So I slept in, it was like a really big room, and I had an air mattress like in this one corner. It was like cats everywhere. You know, it was like, we made it work. And I'll never forget going to the bathroom one day, the cat is like asleep in the sink. I'm like, what are we doing? I'm like, where am I?
The trenches.
It was the right thing to do, you know?
Yeah, I completely understand that. It can't be easy, the calling, right? But when you know it's right, you got to do it. So I don't think everyone has an appreciation for the range of emotions that you experience within yourself and within the community that is engaging with you. Yeah. It's the full spectrum almost. There are moments of like sheer joy because we have that magic to find joy even in the most heinous crimes. But we also share pain in a really interesting way, especially in those moments. Give us an appreciation of the spectrum of traumatic occurrences from which Black people will need to recover.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the big lessons for me early in the protest was this idea of like, what does it mean to be angry? And I thought I was supposed to like hide the anger, right? I'm like, this is righteous work and da-da-da, like, why are you, like, anger doesn't help. And I realized that like, part of what it means to be human is that we experience the range of emotions, right? That it's not, you know, what I had to make sure was that anger wasn't the only emotion and that anger wasn't the biggest emotion. But in my work to like move anger out the way, I was like a zombie. It was like I wasn't feeling anything. I was numb, and it was like, no, I am pissed, and we have every right to be pissed. And the fact that we choose justice and not revenge is really a testament to Black people, right? Because we have every reason to be vengeful. We like all of those things are right for us, and I had to realize that it was like anger and frustration and love and joy and all of those things sitting in concert with each other. It was not them competing with each other. And like that was actually really big. I remember that moment. I remember tweeting through it, and I remember being like, oh, I don't need to move my anger. I just need to make sure my anger is not the only thing. I do think that that's true in community too. You think about all the injustices. It's like, it reminds me of being a teacher. I taught middle schoolers, sixth graders, 11-year-olds. And it was like, if I flipped out every time an 11-year-old did something, I'd be flipped out all day. Like that's sort of how I feel about America. It's like, if I got upset every time, or if I got livid every time the government or the system screwed Black people over, I'd just be sitting in upsetness, right?
Right.
And part of the work was to figure out, okay, let me like log this wild thing. Let me figure out how I can get to solutions. And like, I'm not gonna let this thing steal my joy, because that's a part of the game. Part of the game is actually to keep me so enraged that I can't get out of it. And like, I won't let you do that to me, And I think that is true for like organizers and activists across the country. Is that like, you say that inflammatory thing at the hearing to like get me riled up, but I'm not gonna give that to you. I'm gonna get riled up after the call, but on the call, I'm gonna give you sweet and kind, because I'm gonna take you out somewhere else, right? And like, that to me was a big game changer.
Yeah, that's great. So help us understand what our communities are going to need to grapple with in order to begin the healing. We've been making it through. What do we need to grapple with in order to begin the healing process?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's our communities as much as like the people that we're up against, like what do we have to fight them around? And it's like, the three things that come to mind. One is, I'm always mindful that people don't choose poverty, right? Like people didn't choose the conditions they live in. Like Black people, we got put here and we got everything taken from us 8 times over, right? 8,000 times over. And then people are like, why aren't you doing well? You're like, no, I think you took everything, right? And I think that there's still a part of society that participates that participates in a logic that says that like you did something wrong, that like and it's like, you didn't. And I think that the reason that matters is that the solution logic to that is also problematic. So you see people being like, I'm gonna give people bikes and book bags. And it's like, yeah, it's not like people do need book bags, but the solution to systemic injustice is not giving 100 families book bags, right? It's actually like changing the structure at the root. And like, we got to figure that out. That like not enough people realize what it means to change a structure, like how the laws are configured and they can do something. So that's like one. The second thing is, when we talk about being a good organizer, I can't give you power. What I can do is help you realize that you already have power. And if there's anything that like we can do in communities, it's that. It's like, none of this stuff works without you. It doesn't work without you buying. It doesn't work without you voting. It doesn't work without you participating. Like literally, it requires something from you. And the more and more you realize your power, like we got it. Like, what we would say as organizers is that there's no problem bigger than community. That community is always bigger than our greatest problem. The challenge is that community doesn't always believe that. And like, we have to sort of like, we gotta like get that together. And the third thing is that part of the magic of Blackness is that we have never lost our joy. That in all of the crazy, we can make a beat, a song, a poem, a dance, like with not much, we have always found joy in each other and joy in community. And I think the more we embrace that, the more we will always win.
Thank you for saying that. So what ways have you seen the community come together to heal? Not with a formal process, but how does the community come together organically to heal? How have you seen that happen?
I think COVID was it, right? Like I think about all the ways Black people organize on Zoom. People who would have never considered themselves like an organizer, like I can't get people together. People are doing bingo nights. I'm like, I don't even know how bingo works on Zoom. You're like, how? How did you recreate bingo for grandma on Zoom, right? Like people figured it out in a way that was just such a good reminder of like, God, we got it. And I don't know if you probably haven't seen the new documentary Attica. On Attica, the Attica prison uprising?
Not yet.
So I won't give it away, but what a huge part of it is you see the men in Attica they're holding elections. They're like they have taken over a prison, and people's image on the outside is like chaos, savage, and they are like literally they got a security team. They got people building the bathrooms. It's like, God, we know how to do it. Like community is something that we've always understood really well, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So who then, I know you talked about a lot of the healing work being not necessarily our community's work, right? But a lot of other communities need to embrace this idea of reckoning and healing. So who has the responsibility? Could we point out specifically who has the responsibility to engage in restorative work, and what do they need to do to promote community involvement?
Yeah, I think that people with structural power, but I want to push and say that I think that like community involvement is often like a what's it, like a smoke screen for doing the same thing over 10,000 times and not doing anything different. So people say to me like, don't you think the police should have a round table with the community? For what? They know. You know that people think that you're beating them up. You already know there's nothing that a group of 18-year-olds is going to say to the New York City Police Department or the Baton Rouge Police Department today that's going to be different. It's not, right? But you're going to use this conversation, reflect on it as an excuse to not do the necessary things that you should do. And I always worry about that, right? That like, don't use this as a way to get out of doing really good work. But what I do in terms of responsibility, I think people with structural power have responsibility. I think people with financial power have responsibility. And I do think that it's like, you will have to relinquish some of the control. And that's what people don't want. That like, that people with structural power are still pretty paternalistic, but they're like, I just know what's best. And you're like, I don't know if you do, right?
Right.
People can't get out of that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to last year or the beginning of this year, which these years seem like a blur, 2020 and 2021. Just a lot has happened. So for the purposes of providing some context, because this conference, we really want to grapple with things that we have just experienced and just come out of, because this is an example of how restorative justice works, right? So reflecting on last year, how can we use restorative justice to address the violence, the hypocrisy, and the successes and failures of our criminal legal system?
Yeah, one of the key tenets of restorative justice is the truth, right? That like you literally cannot do, the circle don't matter, the conversation don't matter, the plan afterwards don't matter. It doesn't matter if people lie. That if you can't come, like if you don't come in good faith, then like literally the rest of the work doesn't matter. And I think that so much of what is hindering progress now is like people just aren't coming to the table in good faith. That like, it's like, why don't we know the disciplinary history of the police officer? Why don't we know, like, why are you hiding this, and like, you cannot expect me to put together a plan if you won't tell me what's true. Like, that's our data. That's community data anyway. You the government, right? You are people. So I think that actually is like some of the key parts. So you think about the body camera footage that just came out in the case in Louisiana. It's like, if I know you lied to me, then why would I believe you? Like, how could you even convince me you should lead the process for restoration when you just lied to me? It doesn't make sense. But it's like the system, the police as an example, will lie about the way this man is killed. It comes out that they're lying, and they'll be like, we're gonna lead the investigation. It's like, you already lied. Why? So that's what I say, is that like, I don't know, all the rest of this stuff is sort of interesting, but it's rooted in what's true and what's not true. And if you can't get to true, we're screwed.
I can't agree more with you on that. So you talked a little bit about the Ronald Green situation. I'm just going to put the name to it so that we can clearly talk about what is happening in Louisiana. Ronald Green is one of several who we have discovered was murdered in a cover-up. Was murdered, and then the murder was covered up, and it did not come out until a year later. Baton Rouge is dealing with this after the pandemic, after Alton Sterling and other Black men who were unarmed were either killed in custody or killed right before being brought to police or in the course of the arrest, right? That is, I think, more intergenerational trauma like adding on top of itself, because these are communities whose parents and grandparents have dealt with racism and violence in their communities. Now we're dealing with it in our communities. Although we haven't seen it before ourselves, our parents have, right? Our grandparents have. Those stories get passed down to us. How healthy is our community right now, today? Are we able to engage in restorative justice as we are right now? Is there something else that we need to do? Is there a missing piece that we need to look at in order to engage a sick population, a sick community that has been dealing with recovering and having to be resilient time and time again, like generation and generation after generation? We deal with this specifically with the historical injustice and present policing training that we offer through the Law Center. And what we've done is, I think we talked a little bit before the call, but what we've done was we took cases that were of racially motivated homicides from 1930 to 55. And we took the cases that had police involvement in those cases, and we turned that into a training. So each training for each police department that we give this training to, we cater that training for that jurisdiction, because in every jurisdiction, there's at least 1 or 3 instances of violence in a community that had police involvement. These are the communities that we are still dealing with right now. Our communities still exist who have not had those instances of violence reckoned with from the past. And now, this year, last year, the year before, 2016, it seems like every summer we're adding to the bill. And so I'm really wondering, thinking about the health of our community, I know we keep talking about our resilience, but it's really unfair to demand of people to be so resilient without there ever being any promise of change. So thinking about the current health of our communities and our activists, because our activists, they've been through a lot as well. Like, we are constantly championing and working on the behalf of and sitting at tables for communities. Do you really think we are healthy? Or do you think that we have some reckoning to do of our own to support our mental and spiritual health for the task that's ahead?
Yeah, so I think that we are healthier than we've been in a long time. And part of that is, I think that it's like the double-edged sword about our relationship to information and each other, that we can like reach out and connect and stay in touch in ways that were unprecedented to a generation before us. I can talk to 1 million people at the drop of a hat in a way that King and Fannie Lou Hamer and they couldn't, right? Like, it wasn't a skill deficiency on their part. It was a tool and resource deficiency on everybody's part. So I think that is a net benefit. And like, we know the downsides to that. We know like the downsides of social media, but there is something really cool about being connected to each other. I think we've also I think this generation or this moment is starting to finally take away the stigma of saying you need help, right? So like the idea of like therapy is like mainstream. It's like cool. And you're like, you have a therapist? Of course I got a therapist. I go da-da-da. Like that's like normal and cool. So like, I think that is a real thing. And the conversation about it is public. And it's almost, when I meet people now, or if I date somebody, it's weird if you don't have a therapist. I'm like freaked out if you don't have a therapist, right? So that is that. But I think the third thing is a reminder that getting the win is 70% of the battle. Protecting the win is the other 30%. And getting it is just not enough, right? So you get it, you fight the good fight. And so I think there's a generation of people who got the wins. And it's like, I think what they are realizing, when I talk to older people, they're realizing that there was a second step of the work, which was to protect it, that like they did not do as thoughtfully, right? And that's their push to us. It's like, it's one thing to get it, but if you don't like make the toolkit public or da-da-da, and like that has really informed my thinking. So as an activist, I'm always trying to figure out, how do we make all the data public? How do we make our strategy public? How do we make the tools public? Because like, we just will not win if it requires me. If every single thing requires me to show up or somebody from our team, we can't win that way. The best we can do is make everything public, because we believe in other people and communities so much that if you just had the information and tools, you go do it. We believe that. And I think that is a part of what it means to protect the win. It's like, how do we how do we, I think about like the cooking at grandma's house, so like the cookout or whatever. It's like we believe that enough people in the family can cook, that one person is not the only, like it doesn't work that way. If every single family gathering was one person cooking, it doesn't work. Even in places where like grandma did it on some Sundays, it's like, I remember my grandmother, like she would cook, but my great grandmother would always sneak in a dish, and my aunt would always sneak in, like somebody brought the cake like, because you knew that one person could never feed the family. Like it always had to be the family feeding the family, right? And that's how I think we win as a movement and as a sort of social justice space. It's like has to be everybody saying we all got to bring a dish.
Yes, you need to come to my house and tell the people here that. Okay. Or maybe we need to revert to the old school where we actually did contribute dishes, because I'm doing a little too much cooking over here. So how can regular citizens be a part of the process?
Yeah, I think that, I'm always shocked at people. I mean, this is like what organizing is to help people realize they have power, but there's no idea that's ever changed the world that didn't start in a living room, a kitchen, a porch, or a basement, right? Like that's how all of everything that you ever know that's changed the world has always started in that way, I think of the first thing I ever did in Ferguson was I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in somebody's living room. That was the very first thing I ever did. And that turned into a whole lot of other things, but it was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in a living room. And I never forget that's how all the big ideas start. So when I think about like what everyday people can do, it's like there's probably a problem in your community. You should meet with people who have the same values as you and brainstorm what you can do about it. Ask a million questions. Like that's how all of this starts.
Right. Yep. So now talk to law students. So we have a lot of Southern University law students that are participating, and that will, if they're not watching right now, they will watch. They had a lot of good feedback and interest in this. So speaking to law students, what are some of the ideals and ideas that they can take into consideration as they prepare for their future careers in law?
Yeah, so we obviously love the lawyers. One of the challenges about lawyers is that part of being a good lawyer is knowing the constraints, because the law is a constraint. That's like what good lawyers do. And then you know how to move in it, you know how to tease it, you know how to like touch it, you know how to break it a little bit, but like the law is the box that you operate in. The hard part is that some lawyers don't know how to get out of the constraints. And we are like, I organize from a place that like anything's possible. So like the law is sort of interesting, but like I broke the law, which is how we created the protest, right? So we need more lawyers who sort of understand the constraints as like a thing to engage, but not as a thing that is immovable, not as a thing that can never be undone, like not as like the only strategy. And there are a lot of lawyers who really do, like that is their imagination stops at that box, and like that doesn't help us in our work. The second thing, and I've come to appreciate this more in the last year as we start to do other campaigns, is that there are lawyers who know far more about systemic things than I do, than the activists do. But they litigate it only, right? So like the best organizing, like there's no real organizing on it. The only tackling of it is in court. So it's like all these litigation strategies. The challenge is that is rarely going to be like the big strategy, but the activists don't even know. So I think about nuisance ordinances is a great example. Nuisance ordinances are these laws around the country that say if the police come to your property X number of times, the landlord can evict you. So like if the police come to your house 3 times for like loud noise, the landlord has a legal right to evict you. We know they exist because lawyers sue cities. That's how we know. But there's actually not any great organizing about it, because the only people who know all the insides and outs are the lawyers. And they're sort of like, we're not organizers, but they have all the information, right? And it's like, we need more people in those situations. I think about the forensic space, like, the difference between probabilistic genotyping and regular DNA tests, all the stuff that like the best lawyers understand because they defend people with all the crazy. Like, how do we turn those into organizing facing resources? Like that has to be a part of somebody's work.
Yes, it does. So I would like to go back to the beginning of the year. So we had what we call an insurrection. And if we could, for as much as you can, talk about the message that came out of the protests of 2016 versus that insurrection. And what do we do with those messages?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have many ideas about it. The insurrection is like stuff that we know. It's like when white people are upset, it's liberty and freedom. When black people are upset, it's like, unjustified. I don't know. And the reason I push, and the reason I really don't think much about January 6th is that, there are other people who like that is that is all they do. And it's like this really radical centering of whiteness and white whatever, and that's just not my work, right? When I think about like the work that we collectively are engaged in, it is one in using every single lever to ability. And it's like, if there is anything I can think about January 6th, it's like we should force have 1 million black people show up with guns or something. Like, I don't sort of tease the issue. Part of what it means to sort of confront and do civil disobedience is to do it in such an interesting way that you make visible the fault lines. And I'm always interested in what does it mean to make visible the fault line. So black people certainly couldn't storm they would shoot us in 2 seconds, but what would it look like if black people surrounded it with guns, right? What would it look like? Something aggressive, but in a way that will not get people killed, but would highlight the show of force being unbelievably different in a way that causes tension, right? And it's those sort of things that that I'm interested in us doing more and more. How do we make the invisible visible? How do we make the fault lines as public as possible?
Great. I'm interested in that as well. I believe that transparency is something in particular that Louisiana lacks. I know that the more progressive jurisdictions in Louisiana have been working. The chancellor's calling right now, excuse me. So we're going to get him on in just a second. But we've been grappling with not just transparency issues, but verifiable data and who is investigating whom. And so I think a lot of the remarks that we get about that's really just, disheartening and not wanting to involve themselves anymore and being disappointed. How do we deal with that feeling of it's not going to change, especially when we're talking about young lawyers who've seen it in Baton Rouge, who've seen it in New Orleans, even though progress has happened, even though we have millions of dollars pouring into our jurisdictions to execute these reforms, we still have a consent decree and a mayor who's trying to fight that consent decree when there are officers in the French Quarter who are still being found to be, planting evidence on people. And this is as of last year. We have in Baton Rouge, like we talked about Ronald Green, but we also have the murder of innocent people at gas stations who are asking for money, right? So there is, I love when you talk about, the healing that we have and that we generate almost, very genuinely and authentically. However, I want you to, in your closing remarks, just talk to the people that are listening and specifically the law students in Louisiana who are up against a giant, I'll just say that, in not only the state police, but also in our legislature, the giants in our city councils that really are the barriers to progress. What's your last words to those students and those people in the audience that feel the weight of depression, that feel the weight of defeat because of how oppressive the community and the system can be?
Yeah, I'm never lost on the reality that is the goal of the system. The goal is to make the problem feel bigger than you. That's it. That's it is what could you do about maternal mortality? What could you do about stop and frisk? What could you do? That's the game. Yeah. And the only way to get through that is to be in community with other people. It will always crush the person. The person can't, you personally are not bigger than that. Community is bigger than that, right? So my advice to people is that once you join alongside other people and brainstorm, you realize they ain't got this. They not smarter than you. They not better than you. They not you. You're yes, these mamma jammas ain't got it. They ain't got it, right? So that's one. The second thing is that our work is twofold. So people say change comes slowly, blah, blah, blah. I believe that. But I also think about the work is coming twofold, that some of our work is harm reduction, right? You know, people criticize me. We did 8 Can't Wait, and people are like, this is reformist, and da-da-da. And I'm like, you know, a big part of my work is to keep you here. That if everybody get killed, it don't matter. We could get rid of prisons, but if all the people are dead, it doesn't matter, right? So part of my work is to keep us here. The second part of our work is like to undo the big system. And I think that people only see the latter as the real work, right? So people are like, if the jail's not gone tomorrow, we didn't win. And it's like, so much of our work is actually to keep you, it's like to make sure you don't overdose. It's to make sure the kid got food today. Like it's all of those, that is a real part of the work. And that is often where you feel the most immediate, like, okay, you're like, okay, got it. It's moving a little bit. And it is always like a both and. It is not an either or, that like we have to actually like keep people alive and do the big thing, and we do them both. So I will remind people that like I get that the end of solitary confinement is not the end of incarceration. I get it. But do we need to get rid of solitary confinement? Absolutely. But those are not at all, they're not in competition, and too often people put them in competition with each other. So we did use of force policies. It's like use of force policies, that's not the end of police. I get it. But if your cousin does not get choked to death, that is actually a big deal for you. And that is big, right? But these are not in conflict with each other.
Yeah. Thank you so much, DeRay. I appreciate your words of wisdom, your experience that you bring to this conversation and this conference. I appreciate you and hope that you'll come back again to talk with us at the Law Center. I want to invite you back formally for the National Civil Rights Conference next year in June. We hope that you can make it.
Let's do it.
Yay. Okay. Thank you so much, DeRay, and have a great one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.